She walked into the wrong building at the wrong moment, and every carefully constructed wall he had spent decades building cracked down the middle. He was a man who had never flinched at the barrel of a gun, never lost sleep over the bodies left in his wake, never once allowed himself to want something he could not control. And then she looked up at him with those wide, uncertain eyes, and Dante Ricci felt something impossibly ancient stir in his chest. Something that smelled like ruin and somehow like salvation. Welcome, besties. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Smash that like, share this with someone who loves a dangerous love story, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get into it. The rain had been falling over Chicago since early morning, the kind of relentless gray downpour that turned the city into a blur of headlights and wet concrete. Scarlett Moore had already missed her bus, soaked through her jacket, and spilled lukewarm coffee down the front of her cream blouse before 9 a.m. She was not having a good Thursday. She ducked under the nearest awning without looking up, shaking water from her curls and yanking her phone from her bag. Squinting at the screen to pull up the address for the interview she was already 6 minutes late to. The building behind her was sleek, dark glass, and monolithic, the kind of architecture that announced wealth without apology. She checked the address again. 41 Meridian Plaza. She looked up at the gold lettering above the revolving door. This was not 41 Meridian Plaza. This was 41 Meridian Tower, which was apparently a very different thing entirely. She pushed through the revolving door anyway, because the rain was winning, and she needed a moment to recalibrate. The lobby was all polished black marble and cold recirculated air, with security desks stationed at its center, like an altar. Men in dark suits moved through the space with a kind of deliberate quietness that made Scarlett's instincts prickle. She had grown up around enough bad neighborhoods to recognize when stillness was being performed rather than felt naturally. Something about this building was coiled. She moved toward the wall to pull up the map on her phone again, and nearly walked directly into a wall of black cashmere. She bounced back. Strong hands caught her by the shoulders before she could stumble. She looked up. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with silver threaded through dark hair that had been allowed to grow just slightly past respectable. His jaw was sharp enough to be dangerous, his face arranged in the kind of composed stillness that only men with absolute authority ever managed. He was wearing a suit that cost more than 3 months of her rent, and his eyes, dark and depthless and startlingly direct, were looking down at her with an expression she could not immediately read. "You're not supposed to be in here." His accent carried the measured cadence of someone who had learned to flatten their Italian roots without fully erasing them. Scarlett blinked water from her lashes. "I'm aware. I took a wrong turn. I'll be out of your lobby in 30 seconds. Something shifted in his expression. Not softening, exactly. More like recalibration. "You're soaking wet," as if informing her of a fact she might have missed. Also aware, and pulled her shoulders free from his hands with politeness that barely concealed irritation. She turned back to her phone. Behind her, she heard him say something in quiet Italian to the man beside him, a shorter, wide-shouldered figure with watchful eyes, and then the lobby was quiet again. She found the right address, tucked her phone into her bag, and walked back out into the rain, without looking back. Behind the glass, Dante Ricci stood at the center of his lobby and watched her go. His second-in-command, Marco, appeared at his shoulder. "You want to find out who she is?" Marco asked. Dante said nothing for 4 full seconds. "No, finally." He turned and walked toward the elevator. The doors closed. He stared at his own reflection in the polished steel and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, genuinely unsettled. 3 days later, Scarlett got the job. It was not the job she had been interviewing for. That position had been filled before she arrived. But a feature writer position had opened at the Chicago Metropolitan Press, and the editor who interviewed her had been impressed enough to call her back the following morning. The job was investigative features, long-form profiles, the kind of work that required her to get into rooms she wasn't always supposed to be in and ask questions that not everyone was happy to answer. It was exactly the kind of work she'd spent 4 years at a smaller paper building toward, and she accepted without hesitation. Her first assignment landed on her desk that same afternoon. Dante Ricci, 51, Italian-born, Chicago-based for the last 20 years. CEO of the Ricci Group, a sprawling real estate and investment conglomerate with holdings across 3 continents. Philanthropist, board member, patron of the arts, untouchable, according to every journalist who had tried to profile him in the last decade. Either the interviews never materialized or the finished pieces never ran. Nobody seemed entirely sure why. Her editor, a dry-voiced woman named Patricia Holt, slid a thin folder across the desk with the air of someone handing over a lit match. "He's agreed to a profile," Patricia said. "First one in 8 years. His people reached out to us, which is unusual and slightly suspicious. You'll have 3 sessions with him at his offices. He picks the questions he'll answer. You push where you can. Don't let him manage you." Scarlett looked at the photo paper clip to the inside of the folder. The lobby, the black cashmere coat, the dark, direct eyes. She kept her face perfectly neutral. "I can handle it." She arrived at Meridian Tower the following Monday at 9 sharp, this time in the right building. The same security desk, the same polished black marble, but the lobby felt different when she was expected. A young assistant named Julia met her at the elevator and spoke almost exclusively in practiced corporate pleasantries as they rode to the 14th floor. The offices of the Ricci Group occupied the entire floor, all glass and muted steel and artwork that cost more than the average home. Scarlett took quiet inventory as she walked. Habit, journalist's reflex, noting the security cameras, the assistants who move with heads down and eyes alert, the absence of anything personal or decorative that might reveal something true about the man who ran this place. She was shown to a corner conference room and left with water and a view of rain-gray Lake Michigan. He made her wait 12 minutes. When he walked in, she was standing at the window with her recorder already on the table and her notepad in her hands, already writing. She heard the door, turned, and there he was again, the same composed stillness, the same overwhelming impression of control power. Up close, in daylight rather than lobby half-light, she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the precise way he held himself, not stiffly, but intentionally, like a man who had decided long ago what every gesture would communicate. He stopped when he saw her, a beat too long. Then he moved to the chair at the head of the table and sat. "Miss Moore, Mr. Ricci, you found the right building this time." She kept her expression steady. "I find the right building every time after the first mistake." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, the closest thing to one she suspected he allowed himself in professional settings. "Ask your questions." The first session lasted 45 minutes and produced almost nothing quotable. He was precise, controlled, and relentlessly careful. Every answer arrived pre-trimmed, with the corners sanded down. He spoke about the Ricci Group's philanthropic arm with genuine warmth, but discussed his personal life with the smooth deflection of a man who had been doing it for decades. Scarlett pushed 3 times, and 3 times he redirected with such elegant efficiency that she almost admired it. Almost. She packed her recorder and notepad without letting the frustration reach her face, thanked him, and turned toward the door. "You didn't ask the question you actually came to ask." Behind her, she turned back. He was still seated, watching her with those dark, direct eyes. "I have 2 more sessions." "I'm pacing myself." This time, the corner of his mouth moved further, closer to real. "Thursday. Same time." She nodded and left. In the elevator, she exhaled slowly and pressed her back against the wall. Julia, riding down beside her, said nothing, but she was smiling faintly at the floor. By the time Thursday arrived, Scarlett had done enough additional research to fill a second folder. She'd spoken to 3 former Ricci Group employees, all of whom spoke carefully, choosing words like they were navigating a minefield, and 1 city council member who had tried to block a Ricci development project 7 years ago and had subsequently, inexplicably, changed his vote. Nobody said anything incriminating. Nobody needed to. The shape of what wasn't being said was almost as informative as what was. The second session was different. He was waiting when she arrived. Seated already, a cup of espresso at his elbow, a quality she noted because it suggested he had decided to make a different kind of impression today. He asked her, unprompted, about her work at the smaller paper before the Metro Press. She answered briefly, cautiously. He listened the way people rarely listened, fully, without the restlessness of someone waiting for their turn to speak. "You're good at what you do," when she finished. "You're trying to like me, so I write a more favorable profile. I'm trying to understand what motivates you. It's not the same thing." She held his gaze. He held hers. "What motivates you?" she asked, off the record. Something passed through his expression. Something real, brief, and carefully recollected before it could fully surface. Continuity. Making sure what I built outlasts whatever mistakes I've made. She wrote nothing down, but she remembered it for days. The third session never happened as planned. She arrived at Meridian Tower on the following Monday to find the lobby buzzing with quiet that had teeth in it. Security doubled. Staff moving faster. Conversations cut short when she appeared. Julia met her at the elevator with an apology in her eyes and said Mr. Ricci had been pulled into an urgent matter but would reschedule. Scarlett was already turning toward the exit when the elevator opened and Dante stepped out, tie loosened, jaw set, eyes scanning the lobby with the focused intensity of a general assessing a front line. He saw her. He crossed the lobby in 10 strides. "Come with me?" "I beg your pardon?" "Upstairs. 10 minutes. I'll give you the session." She looked at him for a moment, the barely contained urgency, the muscle working his jaw, and said, "You look like you're about to go to war." "I'm always about to go to war." "Come upstairs." She followed. The third session lasted 2 hours. Whatever had happened that morning, and she could see the residue of it on him, the tension still sitting in his shoulders, seemed to have stripped away one layer of the careful management he usually performed. He answered questions he had deflected before. He spoke about coming to America at 23 with nothing but the name of a man who owed his father a favor. He spoke about building the Ricci Group from a single real estate acquisition in Wicker Park into an empire. He did not speak about how, exactly, some of the early financing had materialized, and she did not push that particular thread. Not yet. At some point in the second hour, his assistant brought coffee, and the conversation moved, without either of them fully directing it, from professional to personal. He asked about her family. She answered more than she intended to. He listened in that same complete way, the quality she noticed in the second session, so unusual in men with power that it felt almost disarming. When she finally packed her things to leave, he walked her to the elevator himself. It was unnecessary. She suspected he knew it was unnecessary. "The profile runs in 3 weeks." "I know." The elevator arrived. "You'll let me read it before it publishes?" he asked. "That's not how journalism works." "No, I suppose it isn't." The doors closed between them. She stood in the descending elevator and told herself, very firmly, that whatever was happening in her chest was professional curiosity and nothing else. The following week, she was reviewing her notes at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the paper when a man slid into the seat across from her, without invitation. He was broad, well-dressed, with a smile calibrated for intimidation masquerading as charm. He introduced himself as Vincent Caruso and said he represented certain business interests that had concerns about the direction of her profile. Scarlett set down her coffee. "I'm not sure what you think a profile is, but it's not something that has a direction you can influence." Vincent Caruso smiled and explained, with the patient tone of someone explaining something to a person they consider breakable, that certain information had a way of becoming public if journalists weren't careful about what questions they asked. Scarlett gathered her notes into her bag, stood, and said, "If you contact me again, I'll add you to the profile." She walked out. Her hands were steady. Her heartbeat was not. She almost didn't tell anyone. Almost. It was Marco who appeared outside her apartment building 3 days later that broke the calculation. She didn't know him, had never seen him before, but his name and said Mr. Ricci had asked him to check on her, and something about the way it told her that Dante already knew about the coffee shop. She called the number she had been given for scheduling the sessions and said she needed to speak with him. He called her back in 4 minutes. She told him about Caruso. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, the silence on the line was a particular kind of silence that precedes significant action. "You're not going to tell me not to write the profile." "No. I'm going to tell you that you'll have a driver starting tomorrow, and that you don't need to worry about Caruso. I don't need a driver. I need to know who Caruso is and why he doesn't want me writing this profile. A pause. Then, he is someone who benefits from the stories about me remaining unwritten. Are those stories bad stories? She asked. Another pause, longer, more layered. Some of them. She appreciated the honesty more than she could reasonably explain. I'll take the driver. Temporarily. Good. She heard something shift in his voice. Relief? Maybe, or something softer than relief. She told herself she hadn't heard it and went to bed. The driver's name was Paolo, and he was approximately the size of a refrigerator and twice as silent. He appeared outside her building at 7:45 every morning and disappeared when she was safely inside the paper. She found herself reluctantly grateful. The feeling of being watched, not by Paolo, but by something adjacent to the Caruso situation, had not fully dissipated, and knowing Paolo was there allowed her to focus on the work. She filed the first draft of the profile 10 days after the third session. It was good work. She knew it was good work. She had managed to find the line between protecting sources and telling a true story about a man who was more layered, more human, and more complicated than the untouchable myth suggested, while leaving the darker threads present but unconfirmed, suggested through absence rather than accusation. Patricia read it, made 7 editorial notes, and told her it was the best thing the paper had run in 2 years. Scarlett sent Dante a one-line message. Profile filed. Runs in 11 days. His response came 20 minutes later. Have dinner with me. She stared at the screen. Then she wrote back. That would be a conflict of interest. His response. The profile is filed. There's no conflict. She stared at that, too. She should have said no. She wrote back. Thursday. He took her to a restaurant in the West Loop that was small and dark and emphatically Italian, with no menu posted outside and a kitchen that apparently operated on the understanding that you trusted whatever they decided to make you. He was already there when she arrived. Again, the inverse of the power performance she might have expected from him. He stood when she walked in. Old world manners, she thought. Or something more deliberate than that. They ate for 3 hours. She couldn't have recalled precisely what they ate afterward. She remembered the conversation. The way it moved between the serious and the absurd without friction. The way he laughed when something genuinely amused him, which was different from the controlled near smile he used in professional settings. Real laughter. It transformed his face in a way that did something inconvenient to her composure. She told him about growing up in a small town in Ohio, about her mother, who had been a librarian, and a reader of everything, and the reason Scarlett had become a journalist, about the years of underpaid work and burned bridges, and the slow accumulation of bylines that had eventually amounted to something. He listened. He asked questions that proved he had been listening. He told her about his father, briefly, carefully, and about the parts of Italy he still missed 28 years later. When they walked out into the night air, the city felt different. Softer, maybe, or she did. He walked her to the car, Paolo waiting at the curb, and stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold night air. Thursday was a good idea. I have occasional good ideas. He looked at her for a moment, that dark, direct regard, and then said good night and stepped back. She got into the car. She didn't let herself look back. Paolo drove her home in silence. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and acknowledged, privately, that she was in considerable trouble. The profile ran on a Thursday morning and detonated quietly across the Chicago media landscape. By noon, it had been picked up by 3 national outlets. By evening, Dante Ricci's name was trending in financial news circles as the profile's carefully worded implications about his early financing and certain city contracts prompted official interest from parties who had apparently been waiting for exactly this kind of opening. Patricia was ecstatic. Scarlett felt a complicated mixture of satisfaction and unease that came with having done her job exactly right. She sent him a message. I did my job. I hope you understand that. He did not respond for 6 hours. When he did, it was, I know, I expected nothing less from you. We should talk. She met him the next day, not at Meridian Tower, but at a small park near the lake that he suggested. He was already there on a bench. No suit jacket, hands in the pockets of dark trousers, looking out over gray water. She sat beside him and waited. The financing questions will lead somewhere. I know that. I've known it was coming for a while. I wasn't the one targeting you. I wrote what was true. I know. He turned to look at her. Something in his expression was stripped of the usual architecture control, not broken, but honest. I'm not angry with you, Scarlett. It was the first time he had used her given name without the prefix. She noted it. Are you afraid? She asked. No. And then, quieter, I'm afraid of losing things I've only just found worth keeping. She looked at the water. That's not something you should say to me right now. I know that too. I said it anyway. The Caruso situation escalated 4 days later. Scarlett arrived at her apartment building on a Tuesday evening to find Paolo standing outside his car with an expression that had shifted from its usual neutral into something controlled and alert. There's been a situation. Mr. Ricci has asked that you come with me. What kind of situation? Paolo's jaw worked once. Mr. Caruso's associates left something at your door this morning. A message. Mr. Ricci wants you somewhere safe while he handles it. Scarlett's stomach dropped. She kept her chin level. What did the message say? That you should have stayed in the right building. The lobby. The first day. Someone had been watching her that long. The realization landed cold and concrete in her chest. She went with Paolo. He had a house. Not the penthouse she had vaguely imagined, but a real house in Lincoln Park, behind gates and mature trees that made it feel insulated from the city. Paolo brought her to a sitting room that was warm and book-lined and improbably comfortable, and Dante arrived 20 minutes later with the same look she had seen that first morning in the lobby, the general assessing a front line. But underneath it, when his eyes found her, something immediate and unguarded. He crossed the room and took her face briefly in his hands, just for a moment, checking her, making sure she was real and whole, and then stepped back. You're all right. I'm fine. What are you going to do about Caruso? I've already done it. What does that mean? It means he won't come near you again. It was the flat certainty of a man whose statements were not predictions, but conclusions. Scarlett looked at him for a long moment. She was a journalist. She understood what it meant to be protected by a man who dealt in certainties like that. She understood what it cost morally to accept that protection without asking more questions. You should know that I'm going to keep doing my job. I know. And that job may eventually point in directions you won't like. I know that too. Then why? Because you're worth more to me than what's convenient. And I'm done pretending that isn't true. The room was very quiet. The fireplace moved. She turned away before her face could betray her. She stayed 3 days. It was supposed to be 1. But on the second morning, Patricia called to tell her that Caruso had been arrested in connection with a city contracts investigation that had apparently been building for months and had broken open overnight. Dante's name was not in it, or not centrally, a fact that Scarlett sat with, turning it over, not entirely sure what it told her. She ate breakfast in his kitchen across from him, and they talked about the investigation, and about her career, and about a book she was reading, and it felt terrifyingly natural. On the third evening, she was sitting in the book-lined sitting room with her laptop when he brought her tea without being asked and sat in the chair across from her and read. He did not speak. He did not perform the silence. He simply occupied the same space as her, comfortable and quiet, and Scarlett looked up from her screen at one point and found him watching her over the top of his book with an expression she had no professionally appropriate word for. You're staring. I'm aware. Using her exact words from the lobby back at her. She felt heat climb her throat. She looked back at her screen. She left on the 4th morning, early, before he was up. She told herself it was because she needed to get back to her apartment and her work and her life, which was true. She did not tell herself the other reason, which was that she was terrified. Terrified of what she was beginning to feel. Terrified of the power imbalance. Terrified of what it meant to allow a man like Dante Ricci to decide she was worth protecting. She left a note, professional, thanking him for the hospitality, and took a cab home. By 10 a.m., she was at her desk at the paper. By noon, she had 2 missed calls from an unknown number she didn't answer. By 2 p.m., Paolo appeared outside the Metro Press building and stood by the car with the patient stillness of a man who had been told to wait. She went down and walked to the car and said, "He sent you. He asked me to make sure you were all right." Paolo said, "To tell you he's not chasing you. He just wants to know you're safe." She stood in the cold afternoon air and felt, somewhere deep in her chest, a crack run to the careful structure she'd been maintaining. "Tell him I'm fine." "Yes, Miss Moore." She went back upstairs. She sat at her desk. She lasted 45 minutes before she picked up her phone. He answered on the second ring. "I left because I was afraid." No preamble. A beat. Then his voice, low and even, "I know. I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of what I want." Another beat, longer, waited. "What do you want?" he asked. She closed her eyes. "I don't know how to want something like this without losing myself in it. I know, again, I'm 51 years old, and I've spent 30 years making sure I never had to want anything badly enough to be afraid of losing it. And then you walked into my lobby soaking wet and told me you'd find the right building, and that was apparently enough." She almost laughed. She pressed her hand to her mouth. "I'm not a safe choice for you. My world is complicated. The financing investigation isn't finished. There are more Carusas. This is a neat story. I write complicated stories. It's what I do." A long pause. "Come have dinner with me tonight. Not as a journalist. Not as a protected guest. Come as yourself and let me come as mine." Yes, dinner was at the house. He cooked, a fact she had not anticipated and which dismantled something significant in her resistance. He made something with pasta and herbs and white wine that filled the kitchen with warmth, and they ate at the kitchen table without the careful performance of the restaurant. Just two people in a bright kitchen, talking easily and honestly and laughing more than either of them had probably planned to. When dinner was finished and the table was cleared, he poured 2 glasses of wine, and they moved to the sitting room, and the conversation slowed into something more serious, more tender, the kind of conversation that only happened between people who had decided to stop managing what the other one saw. He told her things he had not told the journalist version of her, about the choices he had made in the years when the Ricci group was being built, the corners he had cut, the alliances he had made, the things he had allowed himself to be blind to because he was young and ambitious, and the alternative was going back to nothing, about the gradual, uncomfortable process of trying to build something cleaner from something that wasn't, without being able to fully undo what had already been built. She listened. She asked careful questions. She did not reach for a notepad. "I'm telling you this as the woman in this room, not the journalist. I know, but I can't unknow it. I know that too. I'm telling you anyway." She looked at him across the space of the sofa, the firelight, the quiet house, the weight of everything he had just handed her, and felt, with a clarity that was almost frightening, that she had crossed a line that she would not be able to uncross. She moved toward him before she had fully decided to. He met her without hesitation, his hands finding her face again, careful and warm and certain, and the moment between the intention and the contact was charged with every week of push and pull, every almost and every deliberately not. What followed was not something that belonged in words. The firelight moved. The city existed somewhere beyond the windows, busy and indifferent. Here, in this room, there was only the slow unraveling of armor and the terrifying, extraordinary relief of allowing someone to see all of it. Later, much later, she woke in the gray early morning and lay still in the unfamiliar warmth of his room, listening to his breathing, and felt the familiar cold current of fear move through her. This was the moment she had been afraid of, the morning after, the vulnerability of it, the exposure, the certainty that he would now see her differently or step back or retreat behind the controlled architecture of his public self and leave her standing in the rubble of having wanted something too much. She got up carefully, found her clothes, moved toward the door. "You're doing it again." His voice, quiet and unhurried, from the bed. She stopped, running. "You're very good at it." She stood with her back to him, hands holding her shoes. "I'm protecting myself." "From what?" "From the version of this where you come to your senses. Where you remember that I wrote a profile that has your financial history under investigation, that I am 32 years old and you are 51, that I am a journalist and you are—" She stopped. Whatever it is you actually are. The silence held for a moment. She heard him sit up, come back to bed. Not a command. Something much more difficult. A request. Dante, I have been coming to my senses for 3 months. Every morning since your lobby. This is my senses. This is what they keep arriving at. She turned around. He was watching her from across the room with the same expression she had seen in the sitting room the previous week. Stripped of the architecture, fully honest. She stood there for a long moment. She put her shoes down. The investigation into the early Ricci group financing ran for 6 more weeks. Dante cooperated, fully, methodically, with an attorney beside him and a clarity of purpose that suggested he had been quietly preparing for this particular reckoning for some time. Several former associates were charged. The Ricci group itself was not. His cooperation, and the evidence that he had spent the better part of a decade internally cleaning the structures his younger self had built, landed heavily in his favor. Scarlett did not cover the investigation. She had disclosed a personal relationship to Patricia the morning after she had put her shoes down, straightforwardly and without drama, and Patricia had reassigned the Ricci coverage without comment and with a look that contained layers Scarlett chose not to excavate. She continued her other work, a long-form series on housing displacement in the South Side that she had been building for months, and did it well. She and Dante moved carefully. Publicly, they were discreet. He showed up at her apartment in the evenings and cooked in her kitchen, which was small and cramped and evidently not a problem for a man who had a professional range at home and chose her cramped kitchen anyway. She spent weekends at the house in Lincoln Park and learned its rooms and the habits of staff, who were uniformly warm to her in a way that suggested they had been waiting for a long time for someone to occupy the space she was now occupying. She met Marco properly, Dante's second-in-command, whose watchful eyes held. She had discovered a dry and somewhat devastating sense of humor, and understood immediately that Marco's opinion of her mattered to Dante in a way that was not stated but was entirely visible. Marco appeared to like her from approximately the second conversation, which she understood was a form of endorsement she had not known she needed until she had it. The fracture, when it came, arrived from a direction she hadn't been watching. A woman named Claudia Ferrante, beautiful Italian, exactly Dante's age, and apparently a figure from his earlier years in Chicago who had moved abroad and recently returned, appeared at a gallery opening that Dante attended alone one Thursday evening, while Scarlett was finishing a deadline piece of the paper. By Friday morning, there were photographs in the social column. Dante and Claudia, close, her hand on his arm, his head inclined toward her, the body language of people with history. Scarlett saw it on her phone at 7:15 in the morning. She didn't call him. She went to the paper and worked for 9 hours without stopping and didn't let herself think about it, or tried not to. The attempt was moderately unsuccessful. That evening, he arrived at her apartment at the usual time. She let him in. She did not mention the photographs. He noticed immediately. The quality of her silence was different, not comfortable, not the usual ease they had built. Tightly managed, careful. You saw the photographs. She set her glass down on the counter. Who is she? He told her. Old acquaintance. Genuinely reconnecting after years. The contact had not been romantic and had not been anything to manage. It clearly, without the defensive apparatus of a guilty person, but with the careful seriousness of a man who understood exactly what the photographs looked like and why they had landed the way they did. She listened. Are you telling me the truth? Yes. Because you understand that I have excellent instincts for when people are managing me. I know that better than anyone. I'm not managing you. She looked at him for a long time. I don't do well with uncertainty. Finally, I spent a lot of years being someone's second option, and I have very little patience left for it. Something moved through his expression. He crossed the kitchen in 2 strides, and his hand came up to her face. The gesture that was his, she had come to recognize, the one that said, I'm here and you're real, and his eyes were very dark and very direct. You are not a second option. You are the only option. You have been the only option since a wet Thursday morning in my lobby, and I have been extraordinarily inconvenienced by that fact ever since. Her breath caught. Extraordinarily inconvenienced, she repeated. You have no idea. She almost smiled. He did, barely, but real. And then the almost smile was gone and he was serious again, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. I'm not going anywhere. Neither should you. She didn't go anywhere, but the Claudia photographs had knocked something loose. Not trust, exactly, but a precarious sense of security she had been building. And the uncertainty that followed was its own kind of low-grade ache. She managed it. Mostly, she was good at managing things. What she was less good at was what happened 6 weeks later, at a charity gala at the Art Institute that she attended as Dante's acknowledged partner for the first time. Publicly, clearly, photographed together and captioned accurately. She wore a dress that was green and floor-length and did something excellent for her curves, and he looked at her when she came down the stairs of the house with an expression that she stored somewhere private and warm. The evening was mostly successful. Mostly, a man named Benedetto Corsini, younger than Dante, Italian, relentlessly charming, and apparently indifferent to the fact that she was visibly someone's date, spent the better part of 45 minutes at her elbow, producing compliments at an industrial rate and touching her arm too often. Scarlett handled it with professional ease. She had been navigating unwanted attention since she was 20. Dante noticed at the 12-minute mark. She knew he noticed because she had developed, without fully meaning to, a very accurate sense of where he was in any given room. She watched him from across the space, not moving, not approaching, but absolutely still in a way that was specifically his warning signal, eyes on Corsini with an expression that had evacuated all warmth. She excused herself from Corsini at the 45-minute mark and moved across the room to Dante's side and put her hand in his arm. He did not look at her immediately. He finished whatever he was saying to the person he had been speaking with, smooth and unhurried, and then turned to her, and the look on his face was controlled and private and very close to something volcanic. How long has that been happening? Quietly. 45 minutes. Equally quiet. I handled it. I know you handled it. You handle everything. Something in his voice, the tightly reined quality of it, made her look up at him. Are you angry? Not at you. Are you and do something about it? A pause. I'm going to stand here beside you for the rest of the evening and make it extremely clear to everyone in this room that you are not available. His hand covered hers on his arm. Firm. Decided. A statement. Corsini did not approach her again. The evening ended well. They rode home in the back of his car in a comfortable, charged quiet, his hand still around hers. And when she looked up, she found him watching her. You were jealous. Comprehensively. You didn't show it. I showed it to you. She looked at their joined hands. I don't mind it when it comes from you. He brought her hand up and pressed his mouth to her knuckles, slow, deliberate, unhurried, and kept his eyes on hers the entire time. She felt the warmth of it all the way down. 3 months later, the housing series ran. 6 parts, front page, picked up nationally. It was the work she was proudest of. She came home from the paper on the evening. The final piece ran to find the house in Lincoln Park lit up, and Dante waiting in the kitchen with a bottle of wine she suspected cost more than her first car, and the table set properly, and something extraordinary happening on the stove. He had called it a celebration. She thought, this is what continuity feels like. This is what he meant on that second afternoon in the conference room, when the word and she had felt, without fully understanding why, that it was important. She stood in the doorway of his kitchen and watched him at the stove, sleeves rolled up, jacket discarded, entirely himself in a way that was still slightly extraordinary to her, and felt something settle in her chest, permanent and quiet, like the city outside finding its weather. He turned and saw her face. What? Nothing. I'm just... She stopped. Just what? He asked. Happy. I'm just happy. He looked at her for a moment. Then he crossed the kitchen and pulled her into him and held her, properly, completely, his face in her hair, and said nothing, which was the right thing, which was the only thing. She moved in 3 weeks after that. The decision was not particularly dramatic. They had been spending more nights than not at the house anyway, and her apartment had gradually been converting itself into a storage space for her books, most of which were already on his shelves. He cleared an entire wall of the study for her and said nothing about it, and she understood that this was love, the deliberate making of space. She kept her name. She kept her job. She kept the habits and rhythms of a woman, who had built herself from scratch and wasn't interested in dismantling any of it. He was interested in none of it being dismantled either. This, she had discovered, was one of the things that made him unusual. He had not chosen her despite who she was. He had chosen her because of it. The inconvenience and the professional complications and the excellent instincts for being managed that made everything harder, and the result, once more real, the proposal happened in Italy. He had taken her to a small village in the hills above Napoli, the town his family had come from, the one he had not visited in 12 years, the one he had described in the third interview session with a careful distance that she had understood then as grief. He showed her the house, now in the care of a distant cousin, and the church, and the bakery that his grandmother had owned, and the view from a hill that she suspected he had been carrying in some interior pocket of himself since he was 23 and homesick in a strange country. They sat on a low stone wall at the top of the hill in the late afternoon, the village below them, and the sea in the distance, and the light doing something golden and unstoppable to everything it touched. He had been quiet for a while. She was used to his quiet. He reached into his pocket. The ring was old, his grandmother's, he told her, which had apparently been kept by that distant cousin with the vague faith that it would eventually be needed. It was small and beautiful, a dark sapphire surrounded by older-cut diamonds that caught the light with a warmth that modern cuts didn't replicate. I have been a man who protected himself from wanting anything too much for a very long time. His voice was low, even, certain, and then you were soaking wet in my lobby and completely unbothered by it, and everything I had protected fell apart. I am 51 years old. I have made serious mistakes. I have tried, for the last several years, to be someone worth the life I have. I would like to spend whatever time I have left being that person next to you. He looked at her. Scarlett Moore. Will you marry me? She was crying, which she had not anticipated, and found she was not embarrassed by. Yes. Yes, Dante. Obviously. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. She had the brief, irrational, tearful thought that it always fit. He held her face between his hands, the gesture that was his, that had been his from the very beginning, and kissed her in the golden light above the village, with the sea in the distance and the history of him laid out below them, and she thought, this is what it feels like to be chosen, completely, without the caveat of convenience. They were married in Chicago 6 months later, on a Thursday, the day of the week that had, between them, accumulated a private mythology. The ceremony was small by the standards his world would have imposed, large by the standards of hers, and entirely themselves. The guests were people they had genuinely chosen. The flowers were the ones she had said once in passing that she loved, and Marco stood at the front beside Dante with an expression of deep and somewhat misty satisfaction that made Scarlett love him almost as much as she loved the man waiting at the altar. She walked in alone, because the whole point of her life had been doing things herself, and Dante watched her come down the aisle with an expression she would carry inside her for the rest of her days, something between wonder and certainty, the look of a man who could not believe his luck and was absolutely sure of his choice simultaneously. Patricia Holt, seated in the third row, was apparently crying. This was perhaps the most surprising development of the entire day. 8 months after the wedding, on a Tuesday morning in January, Scarlett sat on the edge of the bathroom counter and stared at the small plastic window that had rearranged the immediate future. She sat with it for a long time, not afraid, or not only afraid, more like someone standing at a door that had just swung open onto a larger room. She found Dante in the kitchen. He was making coffee. He turned when she came in and saw her face and set the coffee down. What? She held up the test. He looked at it. He looked at her. Something happened to his face that she had no words for. Something that was too big for any single expression to contain. Something that moved through him entirely, from the careful architecture of him all the way down to whatever lived underneath it. He came to her in 3 steps. He took her face between his hands. Are you, he started. Yes. Are we? Yes. Again. And she was laughing a little, and his eyes were bright, and his hands on her face were shaking slightly, which was the only time she had ever known them to shake. He pressed his forehead to hers. Scarlett. Just that. Her name. The way it, full, deliberate, like something worth keeping, said everything else. Outside, Chicago was gray and cold and entirely indifferent. In the kitchen, in the small, bright space between them, something new had begun, something that would grow and become and require everything from both of them, and to which neither of them had the slightest objection. She had walked into the wrong building on a wet Thursday morning and found everything she had not known she was looking for. He had spent 30 years building an empire and found, in one unguarded lobby moment, the only thing that had ever made the empire worth having. They were, both of them, exactly where they were supposed to be,